And even at such a young age, I knew that I didn't want to do it. I remember I made a conscious decision somewhere around the time I was 12 or 13 years old, that I looked at my life, I looked at my parents' lives, I surveyed. I was right, she was right, I was loved. And I loved my family. But the thing was, my family didn't have a lot. We had a lot of love, but there were things that we had to do without, and I didn't want to do without them. They seemed happy with that, but I didn't want to do without. I wanted what the world wanted. I wanted what the world promised to give me. And I wanted that. And I knew that I would never be able to have that if I committed to the path that the Lord was calling me to. And so I ran. And I became quite an accomplished chameleon in my teenage years. I was very good at knowing what needed to be said at home, what needed to be said at church, the way that you need to say it, the look on your face, But then when I went to school, I was a completely different person. And it was really a split personality kind of thing, and I wonder what my sisters must have thought, knowing me in both places, and they didn't squeal me out until after I went to prison. But I was an accomplished comedian. I began to drink in high school. I went to parties, experimented with some drugs. I got into the sexual scene. I wanted it all. The world had all this great stuff, and I grew up in the '80s with the hair bands. We wanted nothing but a good time. That's what I was looking for. So the first thing, as soon as I graduated high school, I knew I didn't want to go to college. I wouldn't be able to pay for college. I said, what's the easiest way to get out of here? Who are the partyingest people I know? I joined the Navy. And the Navy is an entire culture of drinking and partying and brawling. The Navy is where I learned to brawl and to fight, which is really, if you're going to be rebellious, that's really what you need to do. And I just lashed out at everything. And I really began this partying mentality when I was honorably discharged from the Navy in 1994. I entered into a very hasty marriage with a woman who was just about as good at partying as I was. And unfortunately, it wasn't built on the stuff that lasts. And she left in 1996. And I was devastated. And the party mentality, the abuse of alcohol that had gone on before that really turned now to an alcohol dependence. Because I needed it to not think about the empty. I still thought that the world held everything that I wanted. I still thought that was the answer. But I just needed to get through this rough spell. And my drinking got to a point where I couldn't obviously drink at work all day and keep my job. So therefore I had to start taking certain drugs to keep me up during the day until the point where I could get home and drink again. And this is what my life had become, and it was numbing. And eventually I began a relationship with a woman where I worked who was in quite the same situation. Alcohol, abusing and or dependent. I don't know, there's a fine line there. We began to live together. Definitely not a good idea to have two alcohol-dependent people living in the same house. And it was volatile. There were constant fights. She hit me with things. I screamed at her. It was a horrible place to be. And there was a baby in the house. But yet I was numbed. And all of this led up then, just a few months after we began living together, this led up to that scene of Easter Sunday, 1998. You see, Easter didn't mean anything to me in 1998. Easter, I had forgotten everything that I had grown up about. Easter was about bunnies and eggs, and the woman I was living with was going to a party at her mother's house, which I was not invited to. So I spent my Easter Sunday drinking. And towards the end of the day, when this woman was supposed to have come home, she wasn't there, and it was dark outside, and I drove up the street, and I found out she was at someone else's house, another guy. And the lights were off, her truck was parked out front, and I knew what was going on. And I was broken. I was devastated to see this. I thought this was like the light that was going to get me. It was the light at the end of my tunnel, and now it was snuffed out too, and I was devastated. I didn't know where I was going to go. I'd been just clinging by my fingernails to this kind of life, and now it was gone. And I went back to the house that we were living in. I knew that we had a handgun in the dresser next to the bed. And I got it out, and I sat there on the bed for quite some time and resolved that I was going to use that pistol to end it that night. And as I sat there thinking about it, this pistol, I'm moving back and forth between putting it up to my head and putting it down. Suddenly, a rage came over me. And I began to rage at the world that had made all of these promises to me, that your life is going to be great. All these music videos from the hair bands of the 80s, had promised that my life was going to be a party. There was never going to be a downtime. It was going to be awesome. And life really stuck it to me. It hadn't delivered on any of those promises at all. And there were two people that I knew I could go out and at least vent this rage on. And so I grabbed that pistol and I left the house and I went up to the street and I parked my truck in the yard and I kicked in the front door with this pistol and I raged like an animal, insane. And I waved my pistol around and I screamed and I carried on and I just vented everything. And I told him, you are the reason why this is happening to me. There's still nights when I think about what I was capable of. And it scares me to think about what we are without Jesus Christ. But regardless, when I broke into the house, someone was there that managed to get out the back door, and I didn't know it. And soon enough, there were several police cars parked out front, ambulances, fire trucks, news crews, the whole 9 yards. And I knew the gig was up. And I thought, what am I going to do now? And I thought, well, I've seen enough cowboy movies. I'm going to go out. Sorry about that. Didn't sound like that at all. I was going to go out in a blaze of glory. And the police had tried to contact me on the telephone, and I screamed and raged at them, and I told them, I said, okay, I'm coming out, and I'm going to take you all with me. And I stepped out onto that front porch with I think it was a .22 pistol, actually, fairly small, but they didn't know what it was. And I pointed it at the first police officer that I could find, and I stood there defying them, do it, end it, take me out. And they wouldn't shoot. And I screamed and I raged some more, and they wouldn't shoot. And eventually there was an officer who had crawled over between the bushes and the house over off to my left that I didn't know was there. And when he spoke, I turned like this, and it scared him just enough that he fired a shot from less than 30 feet away with a .45 caliber bullet that hit me right here in the side, and it hit me hard enough to pick up. I was 240 pounds at the time. It lifted my entire frame off the porch and slammed me into the doorway hard enough to dislocate the shoulder entirely. So I didn't even have use of this arm anymore. And there I am laying on the floor, and I can feel a truck parked right on top of me. And police officers and paramedics reached me at the same time, and were fighting amongst each other whether they were going to administer first aid or whether they were going to arrest me. And I fought with all three of them, and it was a chaotic scene until I had lost so much blood that I just couldn't fight anymore. And the last thing that I remember was being loaded into the ambulance, and I heard one of the paramedic, it was a woman, she said, we've got to hurry because we're losing him. And that's all I know. But you know, this verse in Psalms 103 says that the Lord is compassionate and gracious and slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. The Lord did not treat me that night as my sins deserved, because the next morning I woke up with nurses shaking me and saying, hey, you want to see yourself on TV? And when you really can't remember what happened the night before, the last thing you want to hear is somebody saying, hey, you want to see yourself on TV? I was in terrible pain. I had 37 staples that went from here to here, where they had cut me open to repair the damage caused by the bullet. My mom has received a word from the Lord since then to say, Sarah, he should have died that night. But I spared him. There's no reason that I should be alive except for the compassion of the Lord. And his compassion and his loving kindness started to become real again to me at that point. I can remember the next couple of days are very unclear. I was on a lot of medication, a lot of drugs to kind of dull down some of the pain. And as I would wake up in the middle of the night, I had a little push button thing, and it'd wake you up every 15 minutes. The pain would be so bad you'd have to wake up, push the button again. Every time I woke up, there was a nurse there who I found out later her name was Nurse Peace. And she read Scripture to me. I didn't ask her to. She didn't ask me if she could. She just came and read Scripture. And the only reason I knew it was Scripture was because I recognized the King James language. And I'm in and out and I'm dreaming. It's crazy stuff. But the loving kindness of the Lord began to be poured out to me.